Welcome to The Explainer. We all want to be good people. We all want to do the right thing. But how do you actually decide what the right thing is? Well, today we're going to dig into a really powerful, kind of controversial, but also radically simple idea for answering that exact question: utilitarianism. So let's get right into it. To kick things off, let's just start with a tough one. Just take a second and think about this. It's a classic for a reason. It gets right to the core of what we're talking about. What's your gut telling you? It's complicated, right? Well, the wild thing about utilitarianism is that it offers a surprisingly simple and, for a lot of people, a deeply troubling answer. To really get that answer, we need to jump back in time to the 18th century and meet a philosopher named Jeremy Bentham. Now, Bentham had a huge ambition. He was one of the first big thinkers who wanted to build an entire moral system that had nothing to do with religion or divine rules. He wanted it based on something way more fundamental to what it means to be human. And this quote, this is his big idea, right here. Bentham argued that if you strip everything else away, our entire lives are run by just two things. We are fundamentally wired to chase pleasure and to run away from pain. So he thought, if that's what drives us, shouldn't our morality be built on that same simple fact? And this line of thinking led him straight to his core concept, the principle of utility. It's what we call a consequentialist theory, which is really just a fancy way of saying your intentions don't matter, only the results do. So the best action, the right action, is whichever one creates the most happiness for the most people. Simple as that. And Bentham wanted to make this a real science. He actually created a system called the hedonic calculus, which is basically a happiness calculator. I'm not kidding. The idea was you could literally weigh these 7 factors for any action, and the math would tell you what the most ethical choice was. He was trying to turn morality into a math problem. But, as you can probably imagine, this idea of boiling down all of human morality into a simple pleasure-pain calculation, well, it was met with some pretty immediate and harsh criticism. For many, it just seemed to ignore what makes us human. In fact, critics had a pretty brutal nickname for it. They called it a doctrine worthy only of swine. And their argument was pretty straightforward. Look, if all pleasure is equal, then the pleasure a pig feels rolling in the mud is morally the same as the pleasure a person gets from, say, reading a beautiful poem. And to a lot of people, that just felt degrading. But the theory wasn't dead yet. Nope, it just needed an upgrade. And that upgrade came from another absolutely brilliant philosopher, John Stuart Mill. Now, Mill was a huge follower of Bentham, but he also saw the power in that swine criticism, and he came up with a really elegant way to solve it. So here's what Mill did. He refined the theory. He said, okay, you're right, not all pleasures are created equal. He made this crucial distinction between what he called lower pleasures, the bodily ones, like eating good food, that are fleeting, and higher pleasures. Those are the pleasures of the mind, the intellect, the ones that are more lasting and fulfilling. And this right here, this is his famous mic drop moment. Mill argued that anyone who has actually experienced both kinds of pleasure would always choose the higher quality pleasure of the mind, even if it came with a little struggle. For him, the quality of happiness mattered way more than just the quantity. Okay, so Mill brilliantly solves the swine problem by bringing in the idea of quality. Awesome. But that still leaves that other huge issue on the table. How on earth is a regular person supposed to do all this complicated math for every single decision they make, especially in a split second? The critics had a really good point here. To be a perfect utilitarian, you'd basically need superpowers, right? You'd have to be able to predict the future. You'd have to somehow measure everyone's subjective feelings. It's not just hard, it seems completely impossible for us regular humans. So this leads us to a really critical question. If the main engine of the theory, calculating the outcome of every single act, is impossible to actually do in the real world, then what good is it? Does the whole philosophy just kind of fall apart? But once again, John Stuart Mill comes to the rescue with a brilliant, super practical answer. He argued that we don't need to do the math from scratch every single time because as a species, we've already been doing the calculations for thousands of years. I just love this analogy. Mill says, sailors don't do complex astronomical calculations every time they set sail. That would be crazy. They use charts and almanacs that were prepared a long time ago. And in the same way, he argues humanity has all of history to learn which general rules tend to produce the most happiness for everyone. He called these our secondary principles. And you can think of them like a moral rule book, written by the collective wisdom of humanity. Rules like don't steal or don't lie. They exist for a reason, because experience has shown us that, over the long haul, following them just makes for a happier society. We only need to go back to that first principle of calculating from scratch when these big important rules clash with each other. So this idea of rule utilitarianism makes the theory way more practical. But, and this is a huge but, even with these helpful rules, that core logic of just maximizing overall happiness can still lead us to some deeply, deeply uncomfortable places. Take this problem of partiality. A cold, strict utilitarian calculation would say, save the two strangers. 2 lives are worth more than 1. But our deepest human instinct, every fiber of our being, screams to save our own child. The theory demands a kind of cold impartiality that feels totally alien to our most fundamental relationships. Or think about this one, it's horrifying. The raw math says you should save the painting to help the 100 kids you can't see. But could you really be expected to turn your back on a child in danger right there in front of you? It pits our immediate empathetic gut reaction against a cold, detached calculation for the greater good. And this is really the tightrope that utilitarianism asks us all to walk. It gives us this powerful, noble goal, the greatest good for the greatest number. But it also forces us to ask what, and maybe more importantly, who are we willing to sacrifice to get there? It's a question with no easy answer, which is exactly why this powerful theory is still so intensely debated today, 200 years later.